I inspired a death metal song. My boyfriend Matthew approached me for some of my poetry to use as lyrics. I've already contributed to his band Dracaris by naming it. This was after days of Matthew diligently searching online, referencing his old physics textbooks, and ravaging my extensive collection of psychology books and serial killer anthologies, and coming up with nothing. I showed him the poetry that I penned over 20 years ago when I was hospitalized in Pennsylvania. Matthew took one of them, which was my homage to the antipsychotic Thorazine, and transformed it into the song Thorazine Goddess. Worth noting is that I never thought that I could inspire anyone. I spent years wishing I could be anyone but me. I hate my naturally coarse, wavy, and frizzy hair. I struggle with my weight, which has fluctuated from chunky to moderately obese. And I also wish that I had had braces. Socially awkward and an introvert to the core, I was a nerdy kid with a very full fantasy life. I felt that I was paying my dues with my misery and my isolation. Sometime in the future, I comforted myself, I can cash in these credits for greatness. I wanted to be a world-famous performer. Conflicted with my social deficits, I became alive on stage. But I'm woefully tone deaf, and I have no coordination whatsoever. My legs are frequently bruised up because I'm prone to falling, and just this past week I hit myself in the head with a hammer trying to install a closet rod.
Ouch!
Plus I spent a large portion of my life battling my inherited mental illness. I spent my entire adolescence on an inpatient psychiatric ward. And as a 40-ish woman, I'm trying to compensate for those lost years. And I exert a lot of energy trying to pass as normal. Matthew promotes the song as an anthem for suffering women who are struggling, but also successfully overcoming obstacles, prejudice, violence, and abuse. He sees me as a goddess, commanding admiration and adoration from others who share my struggle. The poem was really just something that I scribbled in my black composition notebook when my right wrist was removed from a leather restraint to do a range of motion exercise. I had already spent 4.5 years on an inpatient psych ward when I signed myself back in at the age of 18. I had only been out of the hospital 6 months or so, and I was humbled. I've been the epitome of the don't girl during those 4+ years, achieving infamy for resisting treatment, acting out violently towards staff and patients, and carving myself up with a vast array of contraband sharps. And now I tapped out. Sheepishly, I signed myself back into the hospital and resigned myself to blindly follow orders. At the time, I was taking a very large dose of the antipsychotic Haldol on top of my regimen of lithium. The lithium gave me ridiculous tremors, but the Haldol had an even more disturbing side effect, tardive dyskinesia. The symptoms include involuntary movement, facial tics, and tongue wagging. The condition is irreversible, so rather than allow it to progress in 18-year-old Deborah, the doctors discontinued the medication and gave me Klonopin instead. The Klonopin, which I know now is extremely addictive and carries a very high street value, was supposed to calm me, quiet the rage, and eradicate my violent tendencies. Plus, it should have made me quite high, but I don't think it did. About 1 month into being a docile sheep, my blood draw showed that I had toxic levels of Klonopin in my system. And rather than prudently titrating me off of the Klonopin, the powers that be stopped it abruptly. I didn't question their decision. I did as I was told. The withdrawal kicked in, and I completely lost my grip on reality. I decided I was going to kill myself for no reason whatsoever. Already on suicide precautions, my shoelaces and bras had been confiscated, and I was forced to wear a very unforgiving hospital gown. I stormed into the bathroom and I ripped the strings off my gown, knotting them into one long cord, and flung it over the shower head like a lasso, a very pathetic noose. An incredibly unlucky but well-meaning female tech swooped in to save the day. She grabbed me by my forearm and refused to release me even after I barked at her to let go. I proceeded to fling her body onto the cold bathroom floor after smashing her head against the shower wall. When I regained consciousness, I woke up in 4-point restraints and Mr. G observing me from the door of the quiet room. Mr. G had worked on the adolescent unit 5 years before. He had stayed with me in ICU the night I tried to kill myself by ingesting Nair. I hadn't seen him since. I don't even know if he remembered me. But I trusted him, and he molested me while I was in restraints. And then to add insult to my emotional injury, I was not believed. I was psychotic now. I had crossed over into a new type of crazy. I was used to suicidality, intense rage and debilitating depression, self-loathing and fear. But psychosis is different. I saw things when I was psychotic, and I remember clearly what I saw, the hallucinations and the delusions. But what's weird and unnerving is that now in retrospect, I see what real reality was. One of the first delusions I had was that the staff of the hospital had placed stuffed animals on my bed as a gesture to wish me well and a speedy recovery. There were no stuffed animals. The strategically placed stuffed toys of my delusions were actually the leather restraints strapping my extremities to the bed. I also believed that I was dealing drugs at a heavy metal concert. My mouth was cottony from all the pot I had smoked, and I climbed atop the 6-foot-tall speakers in front of the stage until I was tackled by security. I wasn't dealing at a concert, obviously, and I didn't smoke any pot, but I had just scarfed down 3 plates of spicy kielbasa after a week-long hunger strike, so I was parched. The security that tackled me were in fact mental health workers, putting me back into 4-point restraint. So yeah, I was aggressive, threatening, and violent, but the most disturbing part about being psychotic was knowing that I was. There were times during these several months when I was lucid enough to see what was going on, to truly know what was going on. The problem was there was this disconnect. My mind and my mouth were no longer working together. I would observe something, be asked a question, and then in my efforts to respond, something would get lost. Not only did my words come out jumbled, but I was aware of this word salad, and there was nothing that I could do about it. I would know what it was that I wanted to say. I'd planned the words in my head, but when the words flew out of my mouth, everything just went to hell. I could hear my words, knowing they sounded crazy, knowing you think I'm crazy, and I was utterly powerless to make you think otherwise. So many times I wished for full-on psychosis. To be so crazed out of my mind that everything was fantastical. Stuffed animals and drug dealing at concerts. But it wasn't. I wonder if it's like that for anyone who's psychotic. I don't know. The only thing that I could do was to stop speaking cold. That way my words couldn't be twisted and I might appear sane. I try to remember this now when I'm assessing patients. I'm undercover now. Working in a psychiatric ER, I'm an undisclosed mental patient. I'm privy to some really cringeworthy stuff. There is no way the ER staff would say half of what they did if I let my cover slip. One of the all-time classic gems was courtesy of Dr. X. I was doing my best and failing miserably, trying to de-escalate a patient verbally to avoid having him be restrained. Dr. X callously ordered the 4-point and the IM of Haldol. I was feeling like a failure. I've had several minor wins over the years. For every patient that I can keep from being strapped to a bed and held down for an injection, it's like I'm voiding out one of the many violations I endured when I was on the receiving end of services. I was visibly upset as the code was called and the spitting and thrashing patient was being tied down. Licking my wounds, I made a beeline toward the ER exit. I couldn't watch, and I desperately needed to have a smoke. First thing I learned in med school about psych patients, Dr. X said, chewing a rice cracker with his mouth wide open. You can't reason with a psychotic. In my alternate reality, I smack the cracker out of his mouth and I knock him to the ground. I start kicking and I don't stop. He blocks his admittedly handsome face with his hands held in front of him in a protective stance. I've actually had this fantasy more than once. Each time the pummeling ends the same, with pleas of don't and I'm sorry. Each time my reality is an act of sublimation. I won't go there. Won't go down to the mats on behalf of my fellow psychotics. I know that anything else would just validate his point. Instead, I rise above. I'm not a psychotic anymore. I'm a fucking goddess.
Yeah.